All right, moving on with session 3. So session 3 is going to talk about geometry cleanup, finally. Probably why you're all here. We do have a new sketch tool. It is within the new HyperWorks interface. I'm going to skip this. This is actually for creating geometry, right? HyperWorks is not at a point where we probably recommend it as a geometry creation to maybe replace some of your SolidWorks or some of your CATIAs, those type of things. Maybe very crude geometries, but it is parametric. It does offer construction history. It does offer nice kind of dimensioning and tolerancing things. But for the sake of what we're doing here, we're just going to kind of go over that and go right to the geometry. Okay. So as we can kind of see off the bat, the geometry for this part is not good. Okay. It is my dream, and probably all of our dreams, that one day the geometry that a designer gives us is going to be perfect. Not always the case, and for many reasons, it's not always the designer's fault either. But let's kind of go ahead and show some of the things that we can do here to clean this model up, right? And some of these are exaggerated and the like, but I do want to show some manual methods, and then I'll show some automatic methods for cleaning up some of these items. Okay. So the first thing, there's some obvious glaring issues, right? So there's a big split in our fuselage, and there's even a back part of the wing that's missing. Okay. But there could be other issues here, right? So, I'm just going off faith that these two surfaces are connected, right? That this line that splits them is maybe there just for construction and not an actual physical split. Okay. So that's kind of the questions that we need to ask. And what we do is we have all of these geometry tools are quite nice, but the ones that we're going to play in most are probably going to be in some of the surfaces option for some patching, as well as some of the stitching. Okay. And I'm going to start with stitching, I think. So this is a multifunction tool, and as you start to get into some of these, you're going to realize that some are multifunction. What I mean by that is, depending on where you click on this icon, it does two different things. Okay, so this left-hand side, you see it says stitch surfaces. The right-hand side says to suppress edges. Okay. Same thing with this drag and spin, right? So drag is on the top, spin is on there. Some people like it, some people hate it. I'd say most people don't like it, but it's where I'm at in my life right now. And unfortunately, I don't develop the software, I just use it. Okay. So the idea behind stitch is it allows us to fix some of maybe these smaller things, right? So this idea that maybe these surfaces were, they came in, but they weren't all actually stitched together. But I can tell that they're stitched together via the graphics mode that we're in right now. Okay, this is what we call our topology view, and it changed automatically when I went into this tool. Okay, if I'd like to set this view so it's not as necessarily goes automatic, I can turn off automatic and say I always want to be in topology view. Okay. I'm going to leave it in automatic because that's what it's going to be by default. So when I enter this tool, it takes me to that automatic color mode. Okay. For reference, green is good. Okay. If you are working on a structure that is that only has green lines, you are all stitched together. That means they're shared. So that means that the mesh between the two surfaces is going to be shared. It's going to be congruent. It's going to be equivalenced. Red are free edges, right? And we obviously expect free edges anywhere there's a gap or a hole in our model, which we have. Yellow, probably not going to be super important here, but those are going to be T edges. So where 3 or more edges come together, surface edges. And then blue is going to be suppressed. These could be used for construction lines, and we'll get to that. Okay. So the stitch tool does quite a lot of things, and one of the nice things that it does is it actually has a little video about what all it can do. Okay, so its essential job is to close gaps in models, right? Whether via dragging one surface edge to another, dragging one point to another, and then another point to another. Or just clicking on edges and extracting a tolerance, making sure that the edges within a certain different stitching distance are stitched together. Okay, so that's what this tool does, and this has a nice little workflow help, and it even has some drop-down help here for all sorts of different options. Okay. And what I'm going to actually use this tool for is a point replace feature, so I can kind of see that I have this point, and if I didn't clean this up, when I go to mesh this, there's going to be a very, very small element here, right? And that's not going to be great for my mesh quality. So I'm actually going to take this point and drag it to the next point, right? So I have that option here into by dragging points and edges. Okay, so I can drag one point to another, and then that point just gets replaced, and then the same thing at the back here. This might be a little nitpicky, but it will make a difference in our mesh quality. Okay. So that's the stitch tool. We'll probably come back to that in a second. Next, let's go ahead and do the patch, right? These are the big obvious ones. Let's go ahead and patch. So I said under the Surfaces tool, there's an option to patch, and there's an option to extend. So let's go ahead and check out what patch does. Once again, this has a nice little workflow video. Okay, so we can see that a patch, we can actually drag a patch, or what we can do is we can select a free edge and it finds a loop of free edges, or we can even go one step further and just select all of the lines that are within a patch. Okay, so what I can do here, it says drag or select lines. So what I can do is I can drag this line, and as I hit this bottom edge, the trailing edge of the aircraft, I'll release, and you kind of saw a little preview there, and my model is all stitched together. Okay, so this is the new surface that was made, and now I see it's green. It got all green, which is great. Okay, let's see if I can do the same thing here. So once again, just dragging from one edge to the other, and I see this option here. There is also an option after you make it for tangency. You'll see my cursor says you can toggle the tangency if you'd like, and it also says click on the created surface to toggle tangency. Okay. So cleaned up those two gaps pretty nicely. The last one that you might notice there's something going on back here. It's kind of green and kind of red. Usually what this is going to be an issue with a duplicate surface, right? So what I can just do is come back to idle mode, select a surface. Just to check, I'm going to hide it. I hit H on my keyboard for hide, but I notice that there is still a surface here. So I'm going to click on this one more time, hit hide. So that just kind of lets me know that there's two surfaces here, and I can delete one of them. So I'm just going to go ahead and hit delete on that surface. Come back to the stitch tool to make sure everything's all stitched together. Okay. And this looks good. Okay. Let me just show a few more quick workflows in case you're wondering. If your model is extremely complicated, you might be wondering, well, how do I know if if everything's connected together, right? I have this big surface model, but I don't know if it's connected together. We can do a few things. Down at the bottom are going to be some visualization stuff. These are just going to be global visualization, whether you want wireframe or shaded or different types of effects on your surfaces or elements. And what we can do is actually turn this to wireframe mode. Okay, so I just kind of see this in wireframe mode within the stitch tool. What I can actually do is turn off all of the shared edges. Okay, and what this does is it kind of really puts into perspective, if I did have any free edges, those would be the only things that are shown in my model right now. So if I saw even a slightest glimpse of red, I'd know that there are free edges in my model. Okay. So that's kind of one little thing. Another thing that you can do is come back to our selection option, and what we can do is we can right click and we can select everything that's attached, right? So attached uses that same topology meaning of, hey, is this surface attached to this one? Is this one attached to that one? Is that one attached to that one? Right? So I can say, well, I want you to grab everything that's attached, okay? And maybe I just hit H on my keyboard to hide, and my whole model disappears, obviously, because everything's all attached. Okay. If there was a surface that wasn't attached, it would clearly be shown to be not attached. Okay. The last thing that we can do is I know for electromagnetic analysis, mostly the OML is the important part, right? So we don't necessarily care if this part is a solid entity, right? We're just kind of interested in the boundary. But in order to be a solid entity, you have to be fully enclosed, right? So we do have a solids tool that will allow you to find a bounding solid, or from bounding surfaces, it will kind of define the interior volume. And what I just use this tool for is I don't actually want a solid, but I just wanted a check, right? So this actually runs a check to see, is everything all stitched together? Are there any free edges? Can I actually make a solid? And if it allows me to select my model, then we're all good. Let me just go ahead and show you what happens if we're not. So that's a free edge now. And if I come back to solids and say I'm clicking, but nothing's getting selected, right? Because it's not able to construct a closed surface because of that gap now that I have introduced into the model. So then back to stitch. Like I said, stitch can just be, in between those two. I want you to stitch things together. You can even just click on the edge itself. Stitch tool is pretty carefree. Okay. The last thing that we might want to do, as far as geometry editing goes, is maybe some splitting. Right. So I don't know about you, but I'd like to continue this midline that goes through the whole fuselage and kind of suppress or get rid of these two edges on either side. Right. So I have this option for interactive splitting, which is quite nice. It just allows you to drag a split. Okay. So if I know I wanted another split within here, you see these snaps to midpoints, right? So maybe I wanted to trim these up. Maybe we're putting a different material or something. We just want to have the control of what goes on the wing tip. So I'm just going to use these split operations to kind of define these, different splits. And these are just snaps, right? So I have a perpendicular, a midpoint. This looks kind of good. Okay. So that looks great. I can obviously split with, a plane. I can come in here and say I want to split these surfaces with a particular tool, and I get my little saw blade, right? So it kind of shows you if you wanted to introduce some frames, you could. This is a micro dialog that will show you unit vectors. So if I wanted in the X direction or the Y direction or the Z direction, right? Maybe I wanted to split in X or split in Y. Okay. And then I can just go ahead and hit split, and the subsequent split will occur. If you ever get backed into a corner, you can always Control Z, undo. Undo that split. Okay, so split is no more. Different options to split with. We don't have time to cover them all, but just kind of be creative with how you get split. The last thing that I said I wanted to do is I don't want these two edges on on either side of my midline. So under the stitch tool on the right hand side, there's an option to suppress edges, and that's what we'll do. We'll just click on these two edges, and you kind of see they turn to a dotted light blue. It's hard to see. I shouldn't say as you can plainly see. But those edges are no longer going to be used within the meshing algorithm, right? So they'll just kind of get meshed over and not considered. All right. So that's where I'm going to kind of stop for geometry. This will be the manual geometry cleanup. I'm going to do all of what I just did in hopefully 1 or 2 clicks in the next session, as well as go over some more of the geometry tools.